Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Allison Bronson, and I'm from Kantor Kantor LLP. On behalf of Kantor Kantor and the Alzheimer's Association San Diego and Imperial Chapter, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really glad that you're here. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to introduce today's program. Over the next 2 hours, you'll hear from two incredible teams. First, Allison Gutteridge, volunteer community educator with the Alzheimer's Association San Diego Imperial Chapter. Following her presentation, where she'll be presenting on care and support services available to the Alzheimer's caregivers and families, we'll transition to our team at Kantor Kantor, where senior partner Andrew Kantor and founding partner Glenn Kantor will walk you through the insurance and benefit systems that matter the most to caregivers and what to do when things go wrong. Each presentation will be followed by a dedicated Q&A, so you'll have two opportunities to ask questions today. A few quick housekeeping items before we dive in. Today's session will be recorded and will be made available to all registrants after the webinar. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the presentations, but we'll open things up during each Q&A segment. The chat and Q&A features are open throughout the session, so please feel free to submit any questions or comments at any time. Our presenters will answer questions and address any comments both in real time and through the chat during each Q&A, so please don't hesitate to ask. If we don't get to your question, don't worry. If the time doesn't allow us to address every question during the session, your questions and your comments will be shared with each respective speaker, who will follow up with you individually after the webinar concludes. And as a reminder, attendees are not permitted to record this session without prior written admission from Kantor Kantor LLP. And with all of that, let's get started. And it is my pleasure to hand things over to Allison, who will introduce herself and kick off our first presentation. Allison, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Allison. All right, folks. Well, first of all, Kantor Kantor folks, thank you so much for inviting me to join you as a caregiver myself in the past and to speak to your group. So thank you. Folks, as Allison said, I'm a volunteer community educator and support group facilitator with the Alzheimer's Association, the particular office based in San Diego and Imperial County. I came to the Alzheimer's Association from having been a caregiver for my mother during her 9-year journey with Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And so as a result, I think I can understand and at least know some of the issues that come up for caregivers. And as a result, I wanted to be able to share some of those things by joining the Alzheimer's Association and sharing some of that data. One of the programs that I'm going to share today, Exploring Care Services, is really an incredibly important one, because what they've done is to clarify various options under the context of folks who are living with dementia. We're going to talk a lot about Alzheimer's, but of course that includes, under that umbrella, all dementias. And so specifically, what I'd like to do is just talk about the agenda and then launch right in. So all right. Okay, there we go. So in terms of what we're going to be covering in this about 25 to 30-minute presentation, before you have an opportunity to hear from Andrew and Glenn about other pretty important options from a planning perspective, you're going to be able to, we're obviously going to be able to talk about why the planning part of it is so critical. But part of that is we're going to describe sort of kinds of respite care. And what we mean by respite care is respite for the caregiver, obviously in the context also of looking at different kinds of long-term and residential care for our loved ones as that becomes necessary. We'll describe options in end-of-life care. And in particular, as and when your loved one needs to be moved to one of these settings, some of the considerations you may have. And then because these topics could be discussed for hours or days on end, there may be things that I talk about um, that I miss some of the things that are important to you. So before I finish, I'll give you kind of a roadmap to other resources available through the Alzheimer's Association should you have additional questions that we're not targeting today. So to start, let's talk about preparing for a future that may involve dealing with Alzheimer's and other dementias. And in particular, that involves the planning that I've been speaking about and really preparing for that future. And part of that is learning as much as you can about Alzheimer's and other dementias. So that has a fairly large impact on some of the things we've talked about, care settings and so on. So it's also, of course, important to learn about caregiving. And folks, for some of you, you may already be in a position where you're very much in that future right now. So you may already be aware of some of this. For those of you who are planning for a potential journey through Alzheimer's or other dementias, I will talk through that as well. So this knowledge really helps us prepare for that caregiving role, knowing as much as we can about Alzheimer's. So just a quick knowledge check to kind of involve you in that process and ensure that you can be as prepared as you can be. On average, what percentage of people living with Alzheimer's or dementia are receiving care at home? And of course, the options here are 25%, 42%, or 80%. Now, obviously, what I'm trying to attach to is your psychic predictions on this, but I'm going to guess that at least some of you selected 80%. That is, 80% of people living with Alzheimer's are receiving care at home. And most care at home is provided by family, friends, or other unpaid caregivers. So given that's true, let's learn a bit more about Alzheimer's to help you prepare for the road ahead. So Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease. And by progressive, that means that, there may be times in which people have good days and other times when they have bad days. The outcome is that it will keep progressing through a number of stages. And there are a number of ways that clinicians and neurologists identify those stages. But in general, and to simplify things, we'll talk about them in three general stages: mild, moderate, or severe. Also early, middle, or late, or for those of you who might also be aware of a system of 7 stages around this. In the early stages, brain changes occur, but there's often no symptoms. But eventually, the individual will experience problems with memory and thinking as the disease progresses. One of the interesting things when my mom was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I remember saying to the neurologist, give me a sense of what's coming because I need to be able to plan. I need to be able to plan how I'm going to help her emotionally and physically deal with this, but also how I'm going to be able to plan around the financial implications, plan around how do I include her choices about what's going to happen, because with a progressive brain disease, inherently you want to be able to do that as early as possible so the individual, in this case my mom, has as much input into the journey as possible. And what was interesting was he said at the time, if you've met one person with Alzheimer's, you met one person with Alzheimer's, which honestly didn't seem very helpful to me at the time. But after the 9-year journey with my mom, and just now being in the role of a support group facilitator and hear about other folks' journeys, other caregivers who are helping their folks through their journeys, I realize that that's actually very helpful because it is true. People do experience Alzheimer's differently. So it's really hard to say this is going to happen in 6 months and this is going to happen in 9 months and the journey takes 10 years and because each person does have a unique experience. And so to that point, care needs change and increase as the disease gets worse. And what is known is eventually the person will need 24-hour care and they'll need help with all of the activities of daily living. So during that early stage, in general, they can really manage all the elements of daily living for themselves. But as they start to get into the middle stage, things like eating and drinking and bathing, taking showers, getting dressed, knowing what to put on for perhaps different social activities you're taking them out for. Um, those kinds of things will all require increasing care. And so the critical element for caregivers is really to know when and where to get help. And it can be really challenging to care for someone living with dementia because of the nature of what they're going through, and therefore, how you're trying to help them emotionally and physically, but also in the context that in many times as caregivers, we're the ones that have the most and closest emotional relationship with the person, and seeing what's happening to them can also be very, very challenging for ourselves. So you don't have to do this alone. Resources and support are available at every stage of the disease. And sadly enough, even, if it's your partner, the person that you would have most shared this kind of thing with may be less and less available to you as Alzheimer's starts to take over more of their brain. There's a note here about checking your insurance coverage and so on. And fortunately, you're on this call where we're going to have some excellent advice from Kantor Kantor who really care about caregivers being supported in this journey. So some of the options that we're going to explore are things like respite care, which is very specifically for caregivers. And the reason why we focus on that first is because I often think that Alzheimer's and being a caregiver for someone with Alzheimer's is very much like, or the best advice for it is what you often find on airplanes. In other words, you have to put your oxygen mask on yourself as a caregiver before you can really help others. And that's incredibly true as caregivers because there's a lot required of you emotionally and physically. So as a result, I'm going to start with respite care for caregivers first before we even talk about some of the options for our folks, for our loved ones. So what is respite care? What do I mean by that? Well, respite care gives caregivers a break while someone else cares for the person living with dementia in a safe environment. And it's that rest, it's that opportunity to put on the oxygen so that you can be all you need to be for your loved one. Right? So let's look at the different kinds of respite care. So I'm going to talk about 4 kinds in particular. The first is what we call, oops. The first is what we call informal help. And what I mean by that is getting help from people you know. So this is family and friends, people who can help you with things like making appointments, paying bills, helping manage the person's finances, visiting the person living with dementia so that you can take a break, right? And quite often, at least speaking for myself, at the beginning, I tended to back off from that. I can do this. This is my journey too. But what you find very quickly is that they become an important part of your care team. So informal help. The next topic I want to talk about is home care. So there are also respite services that you can pay for. No big surprise on that one. Not all in-home respite services are the same. So there are really 2 types I want to focus on here. Home care professionals usually help with daily living. So it doesn't include medical care. And some of the services are things like companion services, so help with supervision, activities the person may enjoy, taking them on a walk, visiting others, and so on. The second type is personal care services, help with bathing or showers. This is actually one of the first home care services I got from my mom, was help with showering and so on. Because for whatever reason, my mom didn't want me to help her and she was unwilling to take a shower. Whereas having someone come in to do this with her, um, with my personal admonition that the doctor had asked for this, allowed her to get this help. But other things can be using a toilet, eating, exercising, and other personal care need services. And then importantly as well, household services. So help with cleaning the house, shopping, or making meals. The third kind of respite is adult day centers. And adult day centers can be another important respite care option, but they're also an important source for your loved one living with dementia to be able to go somewhere where they can also be fully supported in things like social activities. And quite honestly, ongoing research has really found that one of the ways for folks with dementia to slow down the effects of the progression are things like social activities, interacting socially with other folks, staying connected, having to use parts of their brain to do that, whether it's activities of exercise programs and so on. And what that does is it creates new neural pathways in the brain that are not yet being blocked by the Alzheimer's amyloid plaques. So these are usually led by trained individuals who know issues related to memory care and dementia. And they can be a good choice for caregivers who may be working during the day still. And even if you're not working, to be able to do what you need to do to support yourself and give you time to rest, to run errands, to finish other jobs, and to look after yourself. Some of them are open 7 to 10 hours per day. Some have weekend and evening hours. And some even have transportation and meals for the person living with dementia. There are a lot of options out there. The fourth kind of respite for yourself is home health care. And home health care focuses on personal care and help around the house and is able to respond to medical needs. So essentially, a doctor orders medical care that's given in the home by a licensed health professional, like a nurse or a physical therapist. And the agency usually coordinates this care. And they may do things like, aside from help around the house and so on, they can also do things like wound care and injections if there's a requirement for injections to be given on a regular basis, physical, occupational, or speech therapy. All right. So now let's look at options for your loved one in terms of someday the person living with Alzheimer's or another dementia may require more care than you can give them at home. And that's a tough one because almost everyone I've met who's a caregiver to someone they love and support doesn't want them to leave home. But there are some times when they require more care than you can give at home. So they'll need 24-hour supervision and more intensive care. And so there are professionally staffed residential care communities that give this level of help. And they include independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing homes. So let's look at each of these so you have an idea of what the difference is between each of them. So we'll start with independent living. All right. So independent living can be a good option for folks that mostly can take care of themselves. They usually have limited supervision, so they have to be able to live on their own, but they may offer social activities, transportation. They may offer food in a dining room, so your loved one doesn't have to make meals anymore, etc. So, independent living. Assisted living is a step up from that. And so these may often be, or we often find, are actually the first step that individuals make after leaving home. They can be a great option for people who can no longer live at home. Um, and they usually offer housing, of course, meals, supportive services. So anything from the point of view of um, activities, the kinds of things that the adult day centers would have offered, healthcare. And then skilled nursing homes are often a step beyond that, in that as your loved one may need care more 24 hours a day, and these are really designed to help providing that 24-hour care. So as opposed to assisting living, where there's less than 24-hour care, it may be available on demand. But in this case, we've got 24-hour care, we've got long-term medical help. There is consulting on nutrition and food, there's care planning, recreational activities. You'll also have access quite often to things like advisors in spirituality, and then activities of daily living, bath, shower. My mom went into long-term and residential care, into skilled nursing home, and in fact, you're likely also aware there's a classification of memory care within those, and quite often that becomes a choice. In my mom's case, because she became increasingly combative and agitated, she was looking to always try to leave home. So I was sort of up in the middle of the night, kind of listening for her and that kind of thing. So when we went into a skilled nursing home, she actually had to be in memory care so that there was an element of locked doors she couldn't escape. I do have to say that she was exceptionally well cared for. And the great thing about memory care, if it becomes a consideration, is that folks in these facilities really have great capability to deal with those folks who have Alzheimer's and may be sort of in late stage where they're increasingly agitated and so on. And are really they're great people. It's amazing what they do. So let's look at a topic that, let me say up front, it can often be uncomfortable, and often something, honestly, we don't want to think about, particularly when we're already having to think about an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and that is end-of-life care. So end-of-life care, just to define it, is healthcare for a person who's near the end of their life. There may be many care needs in the final stages of Alzheimer's disease and specifically, and you may not be able to handle these needs without special help. These end of care services that I'm going to specifically talk about are palliative care and hospice care. So I can allow you to understand kind of the differences between these two support services. All right, so we're going to talk about what is it, what's the goal, how does it work, and availability. So what is it? Well, palliative care is specialized medical help which focuses on relieving the symptoms and stress of the illness. This type of care can help a person cope with side effects from medical treatments. And, that's not just Alzheimer's based care treatments. Often someone may be older and have other complex care issues related to other medical needs. And it also provides comfort and support to people living with these serious illnesses. What's the goal? Well, the goal of palliative palliative care is to relieve pain, to control symptoms, to prevent side effects and complications, and to maintain the best quality of life possible for the person living with a disease. Focuses on the quality of life for the caregiver and family who are facing challenges associated with life-threatening disease. So it's there for your loved one and for you. So a team of specialty trained doctors, nurses, and specialists work with the person's regular medical team to provide that extra layer of help. And this care focuses on the needs of the person. It doesn't focus on what the disease or illness might do. So it's good for people at any age, and they can be in any stage of a serious illness. And it's usually used near the end of life, naturally, because that's the name related to the section we're talking about. But people can receive palliative care with other treatments. And then let's look at availability. So the availability of palliative care does not depend on whether a person's condition can be cured. Medicare, Medicaid, and many private insurance plans cover the cost of palliative care, and the Veterans Administration offers coverage for palliative care visits and services, but coverage obviously varies by plan. And again, it's really a good idea to talk or think about the insurance, to talk to folks like Kantor Kantor, so you understand what's involved as you're planning next stages. And then let's now focus on hospice care. So hospice care is a special kind of care that focuses on quality of life for people who are experiencing an advanced terminal illness. And the terminal, of course, means the person will not get better. Hospice care focuses on treating the person and symptoms of the disease rather than treating the disease itself. This type of care also gives support to the family of the person living with Alzheimer's. So what's the goal of this? Well, the main goal of hospice care is to provide compassionate care for the person in the last stage of a terminal illness. Helps the person manage their pain and other symptoms so they may live as fully and comfortably as possible. Anecdotally, being a facilitator for some Alzheimer's support groups, folks have told me that hospice care that they've experienced for their loved one has included things like people coming and playing music to the individual. But no matter what, it's always been a report of incredibly compassionate care and ensuring that your loved one has no pain. All right, so how does it work? Hospice care includes a specially trained team of doctors, nurses, home health aides, social workers, counselor, clergy, volunteers. Obviously varies from hospice care provider to another, but these professionals often ask family members to help them provide care. Most hospice care happens in a person's home. But it can also be received in a nursing home. For example, if that's where the individual has been, like my mom was in the skilled nursing, that's where the hospice care was as well. And in the US, some hospitals have hospice care. It can be provided in the hospital itself. So you'll see on the right-hand side here, some of the services offered: medical care, so things like medications and medical equipment to help with symptoms and pain. Counseling, the person and family can talk about the emotional and spiritual impact of death. Grief support helps those who care about the person, like you all, with how they're feeling. 24/7 support. A member of the hospice team is usually reachable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And Respite, which allows you to be able to take breaks. So, which is the right choice? What is the service availability, right? It's typically provided during the last 6 months of a person's life. And you see here some points I made previously in terms of who covers it, and the Veterans Administration. All right. So this introduces one of the sort of last things I want to talk about, which is the element of end-of-life conversations. And what I mean by that is that planning that you do at the very beginning to, for yourself, understand what your loved one wants to have happen during the duration of their journey. And then in particular, what do they want to have at the end? So you don't have to be the only one making those decisions, right? But importantly, this allows the person living with dementia to share their wishes and choices. And importantly, to prepare legal and financial documents. These are critically important, particularly in the context of a progressive disease where the individual eventually will get to the point where they can contribute to these legal documents. These are called advanced directives, and they include a living will, healthcare power of attorney, and they let the person living with dementia choose what kind of treatment and care they want at the end of their life. And they may also include wishes for comfort care, funeral planning, and so on, right? That way you don't have to make guesses at a time when you're already dealing with a very grief-filled time. All right. So in the last comment in bold is kind of obvious, but it's obviously critical. Your understanding of what's going to happen will allow you to be able to better plan for that quality of life when you're making medical decisions. And a progressive brain disease can be very different than another kind of disease where the person can continue to participate in what's happening. So let's hear from an Alzheimer's Association expert about the importance of having end-of-life conversations early.
Having discussions about end-of-life care can be emotional and difficult for everyone involved. Yet there are benefits to having these open and honest conversations, especially in the early stage of the disease. One of the most important benefits is that the person living with dementia has the ability to make decisions about how they want to be cared for at end of life. It can also provide families with peace of mind, knowing that they are carrying out that individual's wishes. It's important to remember that these conversations may need to occur over time. It may require a conversation over multiple days, or multiple weeks, or multiple months, and that's okay. I think what's most important to remember is that these conversations occur as early as possible and with the person with dementia whenever possible.
All right. So the goals for care and medical treatment may include consideration of comfort, quality of life versus a longer life. So let's look at a couple of the medical decisions you might also want to think about in terms of some of your planning. So a do not resuscitate, or DNR, which is actually what I had with my mom, is a legal order that a doctor writes. It stops people from using CPR or other life-saving procedures to help a person when their heart or breathing stops. And people with a DNR can still get chemotherapy, antibiotics, dialysis, or any other appropriate treatments. However, having a DNR will stop doctors from using CPR or other life-saving procedures in certain situations. And then let's look at life-sustaining treatments. Medical care for late-stage Alzheimer's disease may include certain treatments to keep the person alive. You may need to decide whether to use or stop or limit or refuse these treatments for the person. And these can include things like respirators, feeding tubes. One of the final things that often happens for folks with Alzheimer's, that progressive brain disease, is their ability to swallow becomes severely restricted. The brain's control of some of those muscles and so on becomes challenged. So that's why you see that there. Hydration, antibiotics, CPR, or surgery. So that may be another decision that you consider. All right. So now let's listen as another Alzheimer's Association expert stresses the importance of caring for yourself and relying on others for support as a caregiver.
Unfortunately, this disease requires caregivers to make a lot of difficult decisions. It's important to really go easy on yourself. Take the time to think through your options, make those decisions, and don't forget to rely on others for support.
And that's probably the number one thing I see in my support groups is that caregivers become exhausted by the emotional and physical decisions they need to make. And I would really encourage you to really put that oxygen on as often you can, because that is really the gift you give your loved one, is being able to support them that way. One other thing as we finish up that I'd like to explore, and that is one of the very realistic parts of exploring care options, is looking at, how do you help them move to a different care setting? So, moving, and what I mean by that is when I had to help my mom move from a nursing home to, for example, or moving from, home to a nursing home. And so let's talk about that briefly as we finish up, just so that we've covered all of your options. All right. So people living with Alzheimer's, as we said, often need different types of care as time passes. And what that means is that we can no longer provide the level of physical care or safe care that they may need, like I've shared with you in the case of my mom. So, it's important to be aware of some of the common changes across and within care settings. And a move to a different care setting may be temporary or permanent, but it can be difficult for anyone. And frankly, for someone living with dementia and who is challenged with not having a short-term, basically the short-term memory has been eroded by this disease, makes for additional challenges. So, couple of examples of common moving situations. They may move from one care setting to another, right? Could be moving from their home to a hospital or nursing home. And they also might move within a care setting, for example, from independent living to assisted living. So here are some ways to help prepare for a move to a different care setting that makes everyone feel more comfortable, including yourself, because honestly, it's incredibly stressful for someone planning to help their loved one make this move. So it's important, obviously, you've probably seen the theme here, planning ahead, making sure you understand how their care will change when they move, and talking with the person before, during, and after changes in care settings, if you can. This prepares them for the move and can help make it easier. And obviously some consideration around those discussions in terms of where your loved one is in their Alzheimer's journey, and therefore, whether they're going to remember what you say, etc. And it's also really important to communicate with a new provider in terms of all of the information about your loved one. Things like, what are some of the care preferences, care plans, medical records, advanced care planning forms, but also things like, who are they as human beings, right? What is it that they like or don't like? What are some of the things that are going to help them settle in? And so, what are some of their care preferences and goals? And so, giving them a sense of, who this individual is. And I would just add to that, getting to know the individuals who are going to now be spending time caring for your loved one, and really getting to know them as well, and having an opportunity to build relationships with them. So as we conclude, as I mentioned, it's hard in 25 or 30 minutes to cover everything we would love to in terms of overall care for Alzheimer's. So let's look at a way that you can get support following this in terms of resources. So if you'd like to just take, if you have a cell phone handy, just taking a picture of this will help you out. But I'm going to shortcut to the main resource I would want you to have. And that is in the top left-hand corner, you'll see a 24/7 helpline. That is a 1-800 number that you have free access to. And the individuals that are at the other end are trained clinicians in the area of dementia. They are spectacular, and I say that coming from personal experience. This is how I originally got connected with the Alzheimer's Association. When I was in a urgent situation for my mom's care. But whether it's urgent or it's whether you want to know things like what are local adult day centers in my area, or what are some of the other things I need to plan for, all of those things that those individuals can help you with. You can also get some of that information from your local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. You see over on the right, things like support groups are incredibly helpful in dealing with both practical but also the emotional issues that we face as caregivers, seeing our loved ones disappear in front of our eyes. And then you'll see down below, there's a great website, alz.org, which provides everything from, as you'll see here, /care, safety and driving. By driving, we mean those tips for how to get your loved one to stop driving, things like that. ALZ Connected is to connect caregivers with one another, and education programs. But again, if you're the kind of person that loves to go on a website and do that research, you will find it well organized and an excellent tool. But if you're a kind of person that just needs an answer to your question, call that 24-hour, 7 days a week helpline. That is free help for you. And I wish you the very best with your journey, and would now turn it over to any questions. Whether Allison and Melissa have any questions they can read off to me.
I don't think any questions have come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that may be a good thing, and it might be because it's just a lot of information I've given you. Or it may also be that some of those questions are related for Kantor and Kantor, and that's fabulous. So hold on to those. But any of the ones based on Alzheimer's, do either call that 24/7 number or get on to alz.org. All right. I'm going to stop sharing this and pass this over to Andrew.
Okay, that makes it my turn to share my screen. One moment, please. Okay. Allison, do I have the right screen up? Everything good? Okay, just making sure. All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed the first half of the presentation. I certainly learned a few things. I think that was really informative, and presented at a really understandable level, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same. My name's Andrew Kantor. I'm a senior partner at the law firm of Kantor and Kantor. With me today is my father, and Glenn Kantor, who's also the founding partner of the law firm. And we're presenting today, as you know, with the Alzheimer's Association of San Diego Imperial Chapter. Our firm specializes in suing insurance companies. We represent people with their claims have already been denied, which means that we meet a lot of families in the middle of an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and often in the middle of dealing with insurance or benefit related problems. And the biggest, the saddest thing about that is often we're too late to help, or at least too late to help in ways that could have avoided the big problem or mess they're in the first place. And so today our hope is to reach you all earlier than that and give you some tools to arm yourselves and hopefully avoid some minefields that people often encounter when giving care to someone with Alzheimer's disease. One thing I have to say before we start, as a lawyer, this is an educational presentation. None of this can be construed as legal advice. Nothing that we say establishes an attorney-client relationship. And it is really important to remember that every policy and every family is different. So while we will be giving general information, everyone should really explore their own situation, either, through whatever method, whether it be a lawyer or something else. The other thing I want to quickly say is that if we'll have a time for questions at the end, but if we aren't able to answer your question, or your question is too personal to be asked in public, our contact information will be available at the end. And my dad and I are always happy to answer questions. Frankly, it's a fun part of our job. So feel free to ask anything that we're not able to ask or answer here. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the foundation of what we're talking about is the caregiver's dual burden. It is what we're about to describe is basically 6 different bureaucracies. You've got long-term care insurance, disability insurance, Social Security disability, which is the Social Security Administration, life insurance, private health insurance, and Medicare and Medicaid. So that's 6 sets of forms, 6 deadlines, 6 call centers, and you, as the caregiver, are expected to know how to navigate all of this. Usually in the middle of a crisis, and usually when you're trying to hold down a job of your own. This sounds like a lot because it is. It's an extraordinary burden that we see a lot of people dealing with all the time. On one hand, it's almost the most natural thing in the world because everyone ends up, in this position taking care of their parents. But on the other hand, it's such an overwhelming burden that everybody should be armed with a lot more tools than we get by default. And a lot of people feel like they're dealing with this alone. And you're not alone. So there's a lot of ways you can navigate these things, and hopefully we'll be able to help you get started and point you in the right direction at least. So first I'll talk about what we're going to cover. So I'm going to start with legal authority, which is the legal right to manage your loved one's benefits especially when they're not able to. And I'm going to be talking about getting that secured before it's too late, because this is a time-sensitive issue. Then I'm going to pass it off to Glenn, who's going to discuss some of the more substantive insurance issues, including disability benefits, long-term disability, life insurance, and long-term care insurance. And especially he's going to talk about some of the things that can go wrong before you even need the benefits, which can prevent you from getting the benefits when you eventually need them. I have to say a shockingly large percentage of my father and my cases regarding life insurance or long-term care have to do with something that we'll call a lapse of coverage. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. At the end of the presentation, Glenn will pass it back to me, and then I will talk about Medicare and Medicaid, what to do generally when a claim is denied, and give you a rundown of some deadlines that can impact all of this, as well as some care and support services available to your family. Because frankly, we can give you all the legal information in the world, and sometimes what caregivers need is non-legal support, because legal advice only goes so far, especially when you're, giving care for some, a loved one with Alzheimer's. So why is Alzheimer's different, and why this disease changes everything? So it's really important to understand why things are time sensitive when it comes to Alzheimer's. So as you know, Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, which means the window to be able to sign documents, file claims, lock in coverage, it's closing. And unfortunately, it's not closing on your timetable, it's closing on the disease's timetable. If you have something like a broken hip, sure, the paperwork can wait a month because there's no risk of a broken hip impacting someone's ability to make the claim. When it comes to Alzheimer's, 1 month could make all the difference, where if someone's making a claim in January, they could have the legal capacity to do it. If they wait till February, the insurance company or benefit administration could reject it, saying they no longer have the capacity to file, and then you have to step in and do it for them. So the irony is the cognitive impairment that is so fundamental to this disease both triggers the benefits and can prevent the benefits. So it triggers the benefits, meaning you're eligible for them in a lot of situations when you're impaired enough to be eligible. Basically, you have to meet a certain disability or impairment threshold. But if you are too impaired or too disabled, you're unable to make the claim on your own. Both you're physically unable to do it, and or the insurance company or benefit administration might reject it entirely. So it's really important to move quickly when it comes to protecting uh, the rights of your loved one and protecting your ability to intervene on their behalf. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is legal authority. So this is basically your legal authority to act on someone else's behalf. One of the biggest problems people encounter, spouses especially, um, is they'll try to file a claim on their spouse's behalf, and the benefit administration or insurer will just say, no, you're not authorized. We can't even talk to you about this, let alone accept the claim. Um, so the Social Security Administration, insurance companies, and benefit plan administrators will not deal with you without legal standing. There's two primary documents that can give you legal standing. One is a power of attorney, also called a durable financial power of attorney. It lets you handle everything on your loved one's behalf. Premium payments, claims, appeals, beneficiary changes. You can do anything if you are a financial power of attorney, with one small exception, which we'll talk about in a second. The other one is a healthcare proxy and advanced directive plus a HIPAA authorization. As Allison talked about this a little bit before, the advanced directive and healthcare proxy allows you to make medical decisions on behalf of your loved one should something happen to them. The HIPAA authorization allows you to physically access their medical records in support of an insurance claim. People very often think about the advanced directive because, oh, as Allison identified, it's extraordinarily important if something happens to you or you can't make medical decisions on your own. But you also need to be able to access the actual records in order to support these claims. So it's really important that you get both of these things, and that you get them as soon as you can, because you can only obtain them if your loved one has the capacity to sign these documents. Just like they may not have the capacity to eventually file a claim. If you wait too long, a court may decide they don't have the capacity to sign the power of attorney in the first place. And if you wait too long, you're out of luck, and it can cause significant problems. So what happens when you wait too long and capacity is already gone? Let's, say you're taking care of your loved one and you try to get them to sign a power of attorney and they either refuse or they're not able to, they're not able to process what's going on at this point. In that situation, what you have to do is go get a guardianship or conservatorship through the courts. As lawyers, I can tell you the last thing you want is to be involved in the court system or have the court system involved in your life if you can avoid it. Any divorced person will tell you precisely that. While the court has a altruistic purpose here, which is protecting your loved one's interest, the entire process is exponentially slower, it's costlier, and the hassle of having to answer to a court supervised, a court ordered officer is just not something you want, especially in this time of your life when you're trying to care for a loved one. So if things go wrong and you don't get the power of attorney or documents you need, you can still go to the court and get it, but you want to act early so you can hopefully avoid that. One other thing that we always advise people to do is build a single inventory of every policy, plan, and account that your loved one has. This includes insurance policies, bank accounts, life insurance policies, health policies, long-term care policies. I can't. Another very shocking section of cases that we get are from children of parents who are needing long-term care benefits, and all of a sudden 10 or 15 years later find out that they have this insurance policy, a long-term care insurance policy, and they come to us to ask us to revive the benefits. It's possible, but very difficult. You want to know where all of these things are, and it's important to ask your loved one about them when they still have the capacity to tell you, at least tell you accurately. So one important exception about everything I just told you, when it comes to the Social Security Administration, they will not accept a durable power of attorney. I have no idea why. The Social Security Administration loves to make things difficult, but there's an easy workaround. What you need to do is get two other forms. One is the SSA 1696. The other is the SSA 11. The first one allows you basically to handle the claim on your loved one's behalf, which would be a Social Security disability claim or a Social Security retirement claim. And the representative payee form, which is SSA 11, allows you to actually receive the benefits on their behalf, to manage their money. Again, you should absolutely file these early, because if you wait too long and the Social Security Administration decides your loved one doesn't have capacity, you won't be able to manage these things, and you'll have to go through the conservatorship route, which is again very difficult. So next, what I want to do is pass this off to Glenn so he can talk about his the things that are right in his wheelhouse, which are long-term disability and other insurance benefits.
Okay, good afternoon. Nice seeing everybody. In preparing for this webinar, it kind of hit me that Andrew spends a huge amount of his time helping people prepare to avoid problems, and he's good at it. What then comes to me are the people who didn't become aware of what they should do to avoid problems, and they're coming to us with those problems. And we have experience in trying to fix the problems. I'd like to discuss with you today some things you can do on your own, and most importantly, is to not give up on the assumption that the problems can't be fixed. Often, especially with Alzheimer's patients who are so sympathetic, the courts will take steps to protect their rights. There's a number of different types of benefits. One is an income protection benefit. This is obviously intended if you can't work to provide you an alternative source of income. Many people have what's called long-term disability insurance, which they obtain through their employer. The vast majority of people, if they have this coverage, it's governed by a federal law called ERISA. It's complicated. It stands for the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. It provides a lot of different deadlines, which it's important that they be met. However, having said that, if they're not met, if the person who's insured here has Alzheimer's, there's ways around it. Just a quick something to think about. If your loved one stopped working 4 years ago because they were terminated, because they couldn't do their job anymore after doing a great job for 10, 15, 20 years, and then a few years later, it turns out, well, yeah, they had Alzheimer's, and that was the reason they were terminated. And you say, boy, I wish I had known this when they were terminated because they still had long-term disability coverage. Well, if they were disabled the day they were terminated, it's possible to go back and make that claim. So you need to think about all the things that have happened in their life and what coverages they have now and what they used to have, because what they used to have might still be available to them. There's a different kind of disability policy, which is called an individual disability policy. This is a policy that is purchased by your loved one separate from their employer. And it's typically governed by the law of the state in which you live. And these policies will also have benefits built into them to protect them against lapse of coverage. Both of these kinds of policies are going to provide income if the individual is incapable of performing their occupation, or typically any occupation, because of the symptoms of a condition. Alzheimer's, as it progresses, is always going to be somewhat easy to establish that they can't do their occupation. Key there is, as it progresses, there may be issues where there's a diagnosis of early onset and the insurance company may say, sorry, not yet. We know you're going to get there, but you haven't gotten there yet. Well, the simple answer is, don't always believe what the insurance companies tell you. There are remedies and ways to get around it, and you need to push back for your loved one. Insurance companies do not want to go to court and argue that someone with Alzheimer's is not sick enough yet to receive benefits. Before we go on, most of us have Social Security. What people don't know is they're also paying insurance to the federal government for a program called Social Security Disability Income, whereby you're not ready for retirement, but you can't work because of a disability. You can make a claim and receive your full normal retirement benefit at an earlier age. So if you have a loved one who is not yet retired, they're probably eligible for this benefit. And so if the individual is receiving long-term disability, the insurance company is going to mandate that they apply for Social Security disability because the insurance company is going to be providing them with a percentage of their income, and the insurance company is the last payer. So if Social Security is paying, the insurance company will be able to pay that much less. But it's still a good thing for you to do to help your loved one get Social Security disability insurance. Okay. There are some issues with employer-provided coverage, or sometimes individual coverage as well. These policies will sometimes cap the benefits they pay if the disabling condition is a mental disorder. We all will think, wait a minute, Alzheimer's is not a mental disorder. It's not something like depression or schizophrenia, but the insurance companies sometimes will try and basically shove any condition they can under the category of a mental disorder to limit benefits. We have been successful in contesting this, and you can be successful. Your doctor can help you contest it by basically applying the policy terms and saying this does not fall under the category of what one would expect to be a mental disorder. Once again, this is a situation where you don't want to give up. You need to push back. Next, please. Okay. I was speaking about Social Security disability. There's something called a compassionate allowance, where what it's really going to do is speed up the Social Security process, which can take sometimes years, but with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, the administration will speed up the process. What it will not do, though, is provide benefits if somebody doesn't have an insured status, meaning they haven't worked for long enough or recently enough to have an entitlement to receive the benefits. Okay, so that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. As I mentioned before, if your loved one has employer-provided long-term disability, there is a coordination of benefits between that and Social Security so that the amount of benefits you receive from both sources is considered. So that if you're supposed to receive $6,000 in total, if Social Security is paying $3,000, then the employer's policy will pay an additional $3,000, so it totals $6,000. An unpleasant surprise for people is sometimes they're receiving long-term disability for several years. Social Security then makes a large retroactive payment when they finally come to the conclusion that your loved one is entitled to benefits, and the insurance company will say, hold on, that money belongs to us. And they are frequently correct. So you need to be aware that your loved one can't recover twice. They have to be setting those funds aside and probably giving it back to the insurance company. Okay. Long-term care insurance is something that is obviously extraordinarily important to someone with Alzheimer's. For those unaware, long-term care insurance is not intended to provide income for someone to live on. It is intended to provide funds to provide care for the needs of someone with Alzheimer's or other disabling conditions. And it's not, when I say needs, it's care needs to help them with activities of daily living, which are physical, can be dressing, toileting, bathing, ambulating, or sometimes even eating. If they need health care, those are things that are not provided by long-term care policies. So that is the purpose of long-term care. Also, the inability to perform one's own activities of daily living will trigger the entitlement to benefits. Obviously, Alzheimer's patients often have that, but often before they get to that stage, they are going to have cognitive impairment. I will tell you, almost all the policies I've read define cognitive impairment as being severe. Well, that's something that we deal with all the time. What the insurance company might define as severe is going to be a much higher standard than what you might consider severe or the doctor considers severe. Uh, just as a war story, my view is if a loved one is living alone or living with somebody else, and they might try and cook for themselves, boil water, and then walk away and leave the stove on, that's severe cognitive impairment because they're a danger to themselves or others. So, in making a long-term care claim for someone with Alzheimer's, you have to be cognizant of the insured's condition and what a reasonable person would say would entitle them to benefits. Issues come up about the elimination period, which is a period of time where the insured has to demonstrate that they are needing the care and sometimes receiving the care for a period of time before the insurance company will start paying benefits. And this can be satisfied in different ways, and it often depends on what type of policy one has. There are two major types of long-term care. One will reimburse the insured for any expenses they have up to policy limits to provide care to take care of them when they have a need. And the elimination period in these instances for what's called a reimbursement policy first requires that the insured expend money for example, 90 days, and then the insurance company will start paying. The other type of policy is called an indemnity policy. In that case, all that's needed is for the insured to demonstrate that they need the care provided by the policy. In those instances, the insurance company will typically pay a flat rate to the insured on a monthly basis, and they can use it in any way they want. And those are really important differences. The indemnity policies are obviously better. They don't have the limitations that the reimbursement policies will have. The reimbursement policies will often say, we will not cover care provided by a spouse, parent, sibling, child, sometimes even grandchild, or in-laws. So they're much more restrictive about paying benefits under a reimbursement policy. Under an indemnity policy, the insurance company has no say in who's providing the care. All they look at is whether or not it's needed. Okay, I talked a little bit earlier about the different ways to qualify. Most policies these days are what are called federally qualified, which provide that if an insured is incapable of taking care of their own needs without assistance, or, and this is important, standby assistance with bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, which is really getting in and out of a chair, or continence, that they're entitled to receive the benefits. Once again, I talked about the cognitive trigger, which is requiring substantial supervision to protect one against potential harm to oneself or others. If your loved one has become combative and might injure you if you're providing the care, then they require substantial supervision. If they're going to harm themselves, once again, by leaving the fire on under the stove, they need it. It does not mean that they cannot, they walk out the door, they walk 100 yards, and they can't find their way home. It does not require that they have that level of impairment in order to receive benefits. The second that you all become aware of that your loved one may be having problems and you receive some kind of dementia diagnosis, uh, you should be taking steps to file claims, uh, both to receive the benefits as quickly as possible and to prevent the policies from lapsing. As Andrew mentioned earlier, one of the problems we see most often is that Alzheimer's comes on slowly. It isn't like a heart attack that comes on overnight, and you may not be aware that your loved one even has it. And by the time you figure it out, their long-term care they've paid for 20 years may have lapsed because they stopped paying their bills and you weren't aware of it. Next, Andrew. Let's see. Okay. As Andrew, said, you should be aware of your loved one's policies before they become ill. Great advice. It doesn't always happen. So if you then do become aware that they've got Alzheimer's or some other dementia, you want to figure out what policies they have. And you want to sit down and read those policies so you understand the benefits they have. Quick qualifier, you may not understand what's in the policy, or that policy may say things that you should not necessarily believe because the laws are such that different states have required long-term care carriers, particularly, to update their policies over the years to provide additional benefits. What you read in the policy may not actually be the benefits that are provided. There may be more there than you're aware of. But there is uniformity in most of the policies as to what is a minimum required. One of the things is going to be a plan of care from a physician. Unfortunately, all physicians are not equally willing to get involved, but in our experience, physicians who are treating patients with Alzheimer's understand the need to provide the information necessary to document a long-term care claim. The physician is going to have to provide what's called a plan of care, where they set out the kind of care that your loved one needs, that they can't shower themselves, they can't toilet, they can't dress, that they need these kind of assistance, or that cognitively they are not safe to be left alone and they need care. Policies have, as I said, evolved over the last 30 years as to what is now provided. When these policies were first issued in the late 80s and 90s, some of them only provided care for a skilled nursing facility. And care at home was not provided. Care in an assisted living facility was not provided. Over the years, the courts mandated that if a policy was going to be issued covering skilled nursing, they had to at least offer home care or assisted living care. So your loved one may have purchased additional coverage, or the insurance company may have neglected to offer it to them. So we want to look at those policies to see what benefits your insured is entitled to receive. Knowing your state's protections is important, as is, once again, knowing what's in the policy. Also, there are many disputes about what facilities are covered. Many policies will say that we will provide home care or we'll provide skilled nursing care. And then there's an issue as to whether that interim care, the assisted living facility, satisfies the policy's requirements. Before placing your loved one in a facility, the best thing to do is to contact the insurance company and inquire, is this facility covered under my policy? If it is, what will you pay under the policy? If it's not covered, ask them what facility would be covered. And once again, if you don't like their answer, you don't have to live with it. They may be correct, they may not. You want to talk to somebody with expertise to get an opinion as to whether the insurance company is giving you the straight story. Next. Okay. As I said, we often deal with lapse, that a child, usually a child, discovers or realizes over time that their parent has dementia and that they're going to need care. And they go with their parent, look through their documents, and lo and behold, they have a long-term care policy. And that's a great thing. But then they realize, but mom or dad stopped paying premiums 2 years ago. It's lapsed. Well, don't throw up your hands in despair. You may be able to do something, you may not, but certainly don't give up. Many state laws have specific provisions in their statutes about reinstating long-term care policies that lapsed due to the cognitive impairment of the insured. Often these provisions say you've got to get back to us within 5 months of the lapse, but I can tell you that our firm has been successful getting policies reinstated as far as, as long as 5 years have gone by and we've gotten policies reinstated. You would think that with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, a long-term care carrier is not going to dispute the need for care. It's not necessarily true. I will give you the caveat, there are billions and billions of dollars in benefits paid, and people don't typically come to our office and say, well, that insurance company, they paid our claim timely. Can you help us? What they're coming to us with is, it's been denied. Can you help us? So we're seeing the unfortunate, we're seeing the unreasonable denial. And we're able to give advice as to how to push back on the insurance carrier. Challenging the plan of care, getting a nurse in to do an assessment are things that we advise and help somebody do if the insurance company denies. One problem we've seen, it's not up on the screen, but I would talk about it, is an insurance company may send a nurse in to talk to your loved one and say, so, are you independent? And the loved one will often answer, oh, yes, I'm doing great. I can do X, Y, and Z. And the child is sitting there thinking, no, you can't, and tries to intercede. And the nurse says, no, no, I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here to talk to your loved one. Well, the response to that is, in legal terms, take a long walk off a short pier. I am here to help protect my parent or my loved one, and they don't necessarily understand. You need to listen to me. Sometimes they will give your loved one a cognitive test, and that cognitive test, if they don't score below or above a certain level, is indicative of a severe cognitive problem. But the tester will sometimes give hints to the loved one taking the test. Don't let that happen. If the loved one can't answer it on their own, that should say it should be a blank and they couldn't answer, and it should not be categorized as a correct answer. Okay. Before we get to life insurance, I will just say that long-term care in this context has a lot of complicated issues, and I would implore people, if they get a denial, if they're told the coverage is lapsed, just please don't give up. That often something can be done. All right, moving on to life insurance, which is the next slide. Probably the single most important or problem we see is, once again, the lapse. Somebody has had life insurance for 25 years and they forget to pay the premiums. Every state has statutes about protecting people from lapse, but it's usually at either a 30-day period or a 60-day period, and often you're not going to fix it within what we call the grace period. However, at least in California, for example, 10 years ago, the legislature passed a statute requiring life insurance companies to give insureds the opportunity to give what's called a third-party notice. So they can designate a third party to be notified if their life insurance lapsed, so they can step in and do something about it. If the insurer did not provide that notice and somebody with Alzheimer's coverage lapses, it's relatively easy for somebody who knows what they're doing to get that coverage reinstated. Also, many policies, life policies, will have what's called a life waiver of premium. And once somebody is disabled, unable to work, the life insurance company will stop charging premiums. You may find out that the coverage lapsed 3 years ago for non-payment of premiums, but at the time that it lapsed, your loved one was not only in need of care, but disabled, and you can make that claim retroactively. So once again, if you find a policy
Glenn seems to be frozen. I'll take over for him until he comes back. Um, so as he said, if when it comes to these policies, the uh the waiver of premium itself or becoming disabled can itself stop a lapse. Um, so there's the another aspect of these life insurance policies. Okay, hold on. Is Glenn back? Glenn, are you back? You're muted. Glenn, you're muted.
I apologize. Technology is wonderful when it works. My internet apparently went out for 20 seconds. In any event, there's other things that you should look for in life policies. Some policies have benefits that will pay during the insured's lifetime. Sometimes it requires that the insured be terminally ill, but other times policies will provide that they have a chronic illness that the insurance company will pay a large percentage of the benefit while they're still alive, which will give them the opportunity to use those funds to pay for their care. Once again, as with any insurance policy, you need to read it to the best of your ability so you can understand the terms to help your loved one. If the terms are beyond your understanding, there are many life insurance experts who can be out there, life insurance experts, long-term care experts, disability experts, who can help you understand and help your loved one avail themselves of the benefits in their policies. Okay. Once again, Andrew spoke about capacity. You may find yourself looking at a policy where your father has a life insurance policy, your father and your mother were divorced, or maybe a second wife were divorced 10 years ago, but the ex-spouse is still the beneficiary. Now, you want that beneficiary designation changed while the person still has capacity. There's a lot of issues about whether you, if you have a power of attorney, can change a beneficiary designation from an ex-spouse to yourself. Courts will look at that with a very skewed eye as to maybe the insured didn't want to change the beneficiary designation. So you want to try and get these changes effectuated while your loved one still has the capacity to do so. Transitions to watch. If somebody leaves work and they have life insurance, for any reason they leave work, they're entitled to convert their life insurance to an individual policy. But I will tell you, it's very, very expensive to do so. But if somebody has a life-threatening condition, it's going to be important. But you have to be looking at your loved one's situation. Once again, if they're terminated because they're not doing their job, you may not realize that it's because of Alzheimer's, but you want to sit down with your loved one and look at all the different coverages. I talked earlier about life settlements, or actually those are terms in a policy which could result in the insurance company agreeing to pay benefits early. There are also private entities that will purchase a life insurance policy for somebody who's very ill. They will pay them for that policy to give them a percentage of the benefits that they can use as they see fit. The person purchasing it will then pay the premiums and get the money when your loved one passes away. Those can be valuable tools, but I would suggest that you need an expert to make sure that you or your loved one are not being taken advantage. Those situations are rife with fraud. Okay. And next, Andrew, I think that you're now taking back over.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk about Medicare and Medicaid a little bit to go over those programs for everyone. So it's really important to understand there's often an assumption that Medicare will cover long-term care, and that's not the case. Medicare will cover doctors, hospitals, and short-term skilled rehab for only a limited stay, usually after a qualifying hospitalization. It does not cover long-term care, which is defined as kind of the day in and day help, as we just talked about with long-term care insurance of things like bathing, dressing, eating, and if necessary, supervision. And supervision is the bulk of what Alzheimer's care usually is, including long-term care costs generally. So unfortunately, Medicare is not the answer. Medicaid does cover long-term care in California, Medi-Cal, but only with strict income and asset rules being satisfied. So California maintains an asset limit for these programs where $130,000 for an individual and $195,000 for a couple. There's also a transfer penalty period, which in California is 30 months, meaning if you transfer assets away from yourself for a certain amount of time, it'll still count against you, which prevents people from trying to sidestep those rules. So it's really important to understand how these medical and income asset rules work, because if you're anywhere near there, you may want to consult with a specialist to understand how you can stay under that limit to gain access to long-term care. What's also important to understand is if you get Social Security disability, you get Medicare, but only after a 24-month waiting period has been satisfied. It's really important to understand that you'll be dealing both with Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid if you're trying to get long-term care and you qualify for Medicaid. So the next thing I want to discuss just a little bit of the caregiver's playbook, like what people can do when things go wrong. One is when coverage falls short. So what happens when a claim is actually denied? What can you do to fight back? Here's a few red flags that you can use to just identify. These are the things we see literally every day, hundreds of times over our career, like the obvious things which make us think, oh, this is a wrongful denial, or there's probably a good case here. One is boilerplate reasoning, where they make these general statements about the status of your evidence without actually explaining why your evidence is wrong. One of the most common is there was a lack of objective evidence of impairment. Not bothering to define what objective evidence is, not bothering to tell you what would qualify as objective evidence. They just kind of throw that out there. So any boilerplate reasoning is a red flag for a wrongful denial. When it comes to disability and long-term care especially, if they deny these claims without anybody having ever examined your loved one, that's a massive red flag. If that occurred, there's a very good chance there is something wrong about the claim process, and most likely something wrong with the denial itself. Another red flag is the insurance company will basically ignore or disregard or otherwise downplay your loved one's doctor's evidence and not really give any explanation why. You may have 5 doctors who say, yes, you need this care. But they said, well, we understand your 5 doctors say that, but our one insurance company doctor says you don't need the care, so we're just going to go with that one doctor. Without an explanation of why they're relying on this one doctor who's never seen your loved one over the 5 doctors who have, that's a pretty good sign that there's something wrong with the denial there as well. Um, Another big one, which people are sometimes surprised to hear, is that if they use language that's not actually in the policy, they may use the wrong definition, um, and not use the actual terms they're required to use, often to their own benefit. Um, Insurance company people are trained they put a lot of effort into training them into figuring out ways to keep the insurance company money, but they don't train them a lot in the things that make sure you get paid as much as you need to get paid. So often they're undertrained and will apply default provisions or easy provisions instead of applying the extra provisions under which you may be entitled to additional benefits. And that's very important. Also important is to know the clock. So we're going to have this whole presentation on our YouTube channel, and we can email everyone a link to that. So don't feel the need to memorize all of this. If you want to screenshot it or copy and paste it, you're more than welcome. But these are some general guidelines or general deadlines that apply to different things that we've discussed. One thing I really want to point out is ERISA. So when it comes to disability or life insurance, if you got it through your employer, it is governed by ERISA. And if it's governed by ERISA, you have to file the appeal within the appeal deadline on the denial letter, or you waive your right to file a lawsuit. It's extraordinarily important. So if you remember one deadline, it's that ERISA deadlines are 60 days for life insurance, 180 days for long-term disability insurance, and they are not missable. You cannot miss them because you will waive all of your rights to sue them if they deny your appeal. And if the appeal is late, they won't even review it because they know they don't have to answer to anyone if you don't file it on time. So another thing that's important to focus on is knowing, two kind of big things. One is the way you collect documentation, and the documentation you collect is extraordinarily important. The documenting what happens with your loved one in between physician visits is one of the most helpful things you can do as a caregiver to help support any kind of claim. If an insurance company or Social Security Administration sees visits every month, okay, that's instructive. But that doesn't tell you what's happening on the months, in the days in between. And often, as Glenn discussed earlier, often our loved ones are not the best historians, or they're not either able to give your doctor the full details, or they don't want to. The reality is, if you, as the caregiver, can be taking contemporaneous care logs and explaining in detail what they're going through every day, and allow that to fill the gaps of the claim, and even give that to the physician so they can understand more what's going on, it can paint a much better picture of a claim and help it get paid, basically. Make sure that you're reviewing your loved one's medical records. Request them ever so often and just run through them. Make sure they're accurate. Make sure they're documenting everything. You do have the right under HIPAA to fix anything that is factually inaccurate. If they list the wrong birthday or the wrong date, you can fix that. You do not have a right to have them remove anything you don't like or to change subjective opinion. So it's important to know the difference, especially when it comes to a disability claim. If your doctor says you weren't there on a day when you were, you have a right to change that. If they say they think you could work when you think you can't change that. It's also important to make sure you understand the policy's definition that you're trying to meet, and make sure the physician evidence lines up with that. For example, with long-term care, if you're trying to show your loved one is severely cognitively impaired, and enough to require substantial supervision, it's insufficient for the doctor to say this person is impaired enough that they can't drive. Okay, well, that doesn't help. That doesn't get you across the finish line, so to speak, because it doesn't explain why your loved one is severely cognitively impaired or why they require substantial supervision. So in that case, it's often helpful for you as the caregiver to make sure the doctor understands what evidentiary threshold they're trying to meet. It's also, it's really important to know when to talk to a lawyer. We do this. There's lots of lawyers across the country who handle these kind of cases, and some of them will give free consultations. We are always happy to answer questions. But the biggest question people ask me is, when do I need you? Like, when do I need a lawyer? If a claim has not been denied, you rarely need a lawyer yet, because as Glenn said, we only see the denials. For every 1,000 claims, for all we know, 900 are approved. So we never recommend someone to pay a lawyer just to get a claim filed, mostly because there's a good chance it gets paid without paying a lawyer. A free consultation is always worth it before filing a claim. But if your claim has been denied for any reason, that's the best time to talk to a lawyer. Because usually, if the claim's been denied, something's gone wrong. And if something hasn't gone wrong, or so you didn't do anything wrong, they're targeting the claim, so to speak, for a denial. Also, if you get signs before a denial that a insurer is mishandling a claim, whether they're being aggressive or they're getting things wrong, that might be a time to talk to a lawyer as well. Also, it's really important if you have an ERISA appeal that you're dealing with, not only do you have to file the appeal within 60 or 180 days, the only opportunity you get to submit evidence is during the appeal. So it's often really important to hire a lawyer to handle the appeal because the lawyer needs to, is the one who knows what evidence should be submitted into the record. So a few other things, where to turn for support. There's, only so far legal advice can take you when you need other things, especially when it's emotional support or guidance or, actual resources in your local community. So as this list, there's the Alzheimer's Association 24/7 helpline. The number's available there. I think that's a great resource. Having someone to call at all hours of the day, even just knowing that that's there, I think can be a really comforting thing. They also offer care consultations with master level clinicians, decision-making support, crisis help, and getting an action plan. All of these things can help you on your journey. Local support groups and education programs offered through the San Diego chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Most of these are offered free of charge, so I definitely encourage you to look on their website. There's also a community resource finder, which will help you find local care, housing, and legal resources all in one searchable database, which is pretty nice. So all in all, if I could have you take away 3 things from our presentation. One is to secure legal authority before you need it. Don't wait too long. Get the power of attorney, the durable power of attorney in the forms of Social Security before you realize that you need them. 2 is build your inventory and keep a record. Get all of the documents from your loved one, including all of their policies. Make sure you know where they are. Make sure you know what they say, and make sure you know when your loved one would potentially need them. And 3rd is a denial of a claim is not the end of the claim. A denial is often just the beginning. So if your claim is ever denied, don't just throw it in the trash and move on with your life. I strongly encourage you to reach out to a lawyer who handles these kind of things. And if you ever have questions for us, you want to ask us directly, we're always available. Our contact info is here, as is the contact info for the Alzheimer's Association. I'm on Reddit for anybody who's on Reddit. If you ever want to shoot me a message, I always like getting Reddit messages, and I'm sometimes posting things. But we're on social media. Alzheimer's Association info is on the left. And if anyone has any questions, we are happy to answer them. I'm trying to see if there's any questions. I'm on the limited screen. I don't know how to stop sharing. Wow. I should stop teasing my father about not knowing how to use technology because I still can't find the share button when I need to find it. Is my screen still sharing or no?
No.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, I'm reading this question right now. Is everyone else able to see the questions, or do only we see them?
Everyone should be able to see it.
Okay. Let me just take a quick read through this. Oh, so Janet's asking a question about how to interpret a long-term care policy. I'm happy to help if you can't find anyone else to help. Usually what we tell people in this situation is to find a different broker, who can interpret the policy for you, but you're saying you can't find anyone locally. Um, Dad, have you seen a farmer's long-term care policy? I don't think I have.
Never.
I don't think I have. That's pretty interesting. Should we can take a look at it.
Sure.
So yeah, Janet, what you can do is email us. Let me put our Oh, I took the thing down, but our my email is here. I didn't spell it right. Can we represent people in all states? It depends. We're based in California. We have lawyers in a few other states. And in states that we don't have lawyers in, like Texas, if the case is still strong and we think we can handle it, then we would take a case in Texas. Actually, we have a case in a long-term care case in Texas right now, a few others. So yeah, if you'd like to um, shoot me an email, I'd be happy to take a look. Um, yeah. I actually am, well, as soon as my bar number comes in, I will be a Washington lawyer. I've been certified in California and Washington, D.C., and I finally got my testing done and I'm waiting for my bar number. So if someone needs to be sued in Washington, Janet, I will have a bar number in time to do it, and I will be happy to help. But hopefully, if the policy's in force, and no claim has been made, hopefully it won't be any problems. But I'm happy to take a look for you. Any other questions that we can answer for anyone?
Hmm.
Great.
We have one pre-submitted question if you would like to answer it,
Oh,
Andrew.
certainly. Certainly.
The question is, let me pull it up for me 1 second. We found a policy that lapsed because dad stopped paying during his deadline. Is it gone completely?
Oh, we need a lot more information. When did it lapse? When did you find out about the lapse? When did dad become cognitively impaired? What state are you in? But that's the kind of thing that you should reach out to us for directly, and we would happily take a look and see if there's anything
Yeah.
we can do.
For example, we need to know if it's an indemnity policy or reimbursement. If it's indemnity, and we can demonstrate that before it lapsed, your dad met the triggers, then the insurance company would have to reinstate it as of the lapse and probably pay benefits going
Okay.
back to
Yeah,
when it was determined that he was in need of benefits.
depending on how far back we're going and if there's any statute issues, but we would have happily take a look and help you sort through it. So if you wanted to shoot us an email, go to our website. All right. Does that that's all the questions we've got. We can let everyone go on with their day. But thank you everyone for taking your time to watch us speak. I really appreciate that. And again, if anyone has questions that we didn't have a chance to answer today or you're not comfortable asking, you can always go to our website and reach out to us through there or email us directly or find us on social media. But thank you all for your time and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.